The Menorah Mibtashim Arena in Tel Aviv buzzed with anticipation. It was November 2023, and the pre-fight press conference for the World Boxing Association Junior Middleweight Championship had drawn media from across the Middle East and beyond. Yehuda, the Iron Shield, Ben David sat at the center table, his compact 5 feet 10 inches frame radiating coiled power. At 154 pounds of dense muscle carved from years of military service and elite training, the Israeli boxing legend had defended his title 6 times and was known throughout Europe for producing fighters with relentless pressure and psychological warfare. His close-cropped gray beard and sharp hazel eyes gave him a calculating presence that dissected opponents before they ever stepped in the ring. He wore a simple black shirt with the Star of Israel embroidered in gold, his arms crossed over a chest that had stopped countless punches. Beside him sat his latest prodigy, Eliav, the Tel Aviv Terror Cohen, an undefeated champion with a 31-0 record and 24 knockouts. Eliav was 6 feet 0 inches tall, weighed 154 pounds of explosive muscle, and possessed a left hook that had shattered ribs and ended careers. His handsome face showed easy confidence as he leaned forward, scanning the room with the relaxed arrogance of a man who had never known defeat. His dark eyes missed nothing, cataloging weaknesses. On the opposite side of the table sat Boyet, the teacher Santos, a soft-spoken Filipino trainer in his 60s with silver hair and gentle eyes that had guided fighters through wars in small provincial gyms for 4 decades. Beside him, almost hidden by the microphone stands, was his fighter Jerome, the Cebu ghost Magbanua. Jerome was noticeably smaller at 5 feet 7 inches and 154 pounds with a wiry build that looked underfed compared to Cohen's athletic physique. His deep brown eyes remained calm and distant, as if watching something far beyond the room. He wore a faded blue shirt with a small Philippine sun hand-stitched by his mother. His hands rested flat on the table, completely motionless. There was a stillness about him that suggested patience rather than passivity, a man waiting for his moment rather than performing for crowd. When the moderator opened the floor for questions, Ben David uncrossed his arms and spoke before anyone could raise a hand. "Look, I respect the journey," Ben David began, his Hebrew accented English precise and deliberate. "But let's be honest here. The Philippines produces brave fighters. I'll give them that. Brave but simple. They come forward. They take punishment. They lose decisions or they get stopped. Your boy has heart, I'm sure. They all have heart. But heart without refinement is just masochism. This isn't some backyard brawl in Cebu where courage is enough. This is championship boxing, and Jerome simply doesn't have the technique, the ring IQ, or the defensive sophistication for this level. He will be target practice for Eliav's left hook." The room erupted with murmurs. Israeli journalists nodded in agreement, while Filipino reporters stiffened with anger. Cameras zoomed in on Boyet's face, expecting outrage or a wounded response. Several international reporters looked uncomfortable with the blunt cultural dismissal. Instead, Boyet smiled warmly and placed a weather hand on Jerome's shoulder. When he spoke, his voice was soft but carried the weight of certainty. "Mr. Ben David hasn't learned about Filipino boxing yet." Boyet said simply, his tone humble but unshaken. "That's okay. He will." Ben David laughed, a short, sharp sound like breaking glass. "Learn? I've been in this sport for 35 years. I've trained in Haifa, London, Brooklyn, and Berlin. I've worked with Olympic medalists and world champions from 6 different countries. I've studied every style, every system from every continent. There's nothing your fighter can teach me that I haven't already analyzed, broken down, and counted 1,000 times before. Nothing." A German reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Ben David, some analysts have noted that Filipino fighters historically show exceptional timing and counterpunching. Manny Pacquiao, for example, or Nonito Donaire." Ben David waved his hand dismissively. "Pacquiao was a phenomenon, a genetic anomaly. Donaire had power, yes, but he was exposed by technical fighters repeatedly. For every one of them, there are 200 Filipino prospects who never learn proper defense, proper footwork, proper distance management. Jerome here is tough, I accept this. But toughness without technique is just a slower way to lose." Jerome remained completely still, his expression unchanged. He had heard this before. Growing up fighting in the cockfighting pits and makeshift rings of Cebu, he had learned early that reputation meant nothing. Only what happened when the bell rang mattered. Words were smoke. Actions were stone. The press conference continued with more questions, but the narrative was set. Headlines across boxing websites read, "Israeli legend. Filipinos lack defensive sophistication," and Ben David predicts target practice for Cohen against Magbanua. Social media divided immediately. Israeli fans backed Ben David's technical assessment, pointing to Cohen's perfect record and European training methods. Filipino fans rallied behind Jerome, sharing grainy videos of his regional fights and his impossible durability. The hashtag Tahimik na Bagsik, silent violence, began trending in the Philippines within hours. 8 months later, the Madison Square Garden in New York was packed with 20,000 fans from around the world. The July night had finally arrived. This wasn't just another defense. It was a unification bout that would determine who would face the undisputed champion next. The atmosphere was electric with tension. In the Israeli corner, Eliav Cohen shadowboxed with surgical precision. His trainer Ben David barked instructions in Hebrew and English, adjusting foot positioning by millimeters. They had studied Jerome's footage for months and developed a comprehensive strategy. Establish the jab early, control distance, land the left hook to the body to slow him down, then finish with the hook upstairs. Ben David had even brought in 4 different southpaw sparring partners from the Philippines to mimic Jerome's angles during their intense 10-week training camp in Tel Aviv. Cohen's team was supremely confident. They believed that superior technique, defensive responsibility, and European boxing science would systematically dismantle the smaller Filipino fighter within 8 rounds. The game plan was proven and had worked against supposedly durable opponents before. In the Filipino corner, Jerome sat quietly on his stool while Boyett wrapped his hands with the same methodical care he had used for 40 years, each layer of tape a prayer. Jerome's corner was silent, focused, almost church-like in atmosphere. His cut man, Nando, who had learned the trade in the chaotic dressing rooms of Manila before moving to Cebu, whispered novena while pressing a cold iron to Jerome's neck. His assistant, a former Filipino bantamweight contender named Dodong, who had fought until blindness took one eye, massaged Jerome's calves with hands that remembered their own wars. What Ben David didn't understand was that Jerome hadn't learned boxing in academies with video analysis and climate control. He learned it where losing meant his family ate rice without fish, where backing down cost more than pride. His technique was shaped in humid warehouses with frayed ropes and no doctors waiting nearby. He had watched his father die for coins in the Mactan Channel. He had seen his mother stitch beads until her fingers split to buy his first gloves. Quitting was never part of the vocabulary. Too many people depended on what he did with his hands. That desperation had refined into something beautiful. The ring announcer's voice echoed through the historic arena. "Ladies and gentlemen, this 12-round bout is for the WBA and IBF Junior Middleweight Championships of the world." The crowd roared as both fighters were introduced with full ceremony. Cohen received thunderous cheers from the substantial Israeli and European contingent. Thousands of fans who had traveled from Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa, their blue and white flags creating a sea of pride. Jerome's introduction brought a massive response from the Filipino community. Thousands waving red, blue, yellow, and white flags, their voices rising a chant that followed him from Cebu. "Ghost! Ghost! Ghost!" The referee, a veteran official named Jack Rice with over 25 years of experience, called both fighters to the center for final instructions. Cohen stared down at Jerome with professional coldness, tried to establish psychological dominance through posture and proximity. Jerome's expression never changed. He simply listened to Rice's words about fair play, nodded once with genuine respect, touched gloves with no aggression, and returned to his corner. Boyett leaned in close, his voice barely audible above the crowd. "Remember, let him believe he is teaching you. Be patient. Your time will come between the 6th and 9th. When he starts to think, that is when you strike." Jerome nodded once. "I remember, Coach. I am ready." The bell rang for round 1. Cohen came out exactly as planned, his movement economical and purposeful. His jab was a precision instrument, snapping Jerome's head back 3 times in the opening minute. The crowd roared as Cohen established control immediately, his footwork creating angles that textbook boxing demanded. He threw combinations with perfect form, each punch landing with mechanical efficiency. But Jerome didn't retreat or show frustration. He absorbed the jabs with subtle head movement, slipped inside with footwork that seemed awkward until you realized it was deliberate, and landed a short right hook to Cohen's ribs that made the champion's breath catch audibly. Good body work from Magbanua, the commentator noted. Cohen felt that one. That's old-school Filipino investing. Body shots that don't win rounds immediately but pay dividends late. Round 2 followed the pattern. Cohen landed the cleaner, more visible punches, his left hook catching Jerome flush on the jaw in a punch that would have staggered most fighters. The crowd gasped. The sound was crisp and brutal. Jerome's head snapped sideways, but he didn't stumble. He took 1 half step back, reset his feet with unconscious efficiency, and immediately moved forward again with the same patient, waiting expression. In the Israeli corner, Ben David was animated but controlled, his voice carrying specific instructions. Again, the hook to the body. He is open there. Maintain distance. Do not let him inside. But something was happening that Ben David's analytical mind couldn't process. Each time Cohen landed clean, Jerome's response was to close distance, not create it. His eyes showed no calculation, no fear, only a deepening focus. He was implementing a strategy Ben David couldn't recognize because it existed outside European boxing logic. By round 3, the pattern was clear. Cohen would land 2 or 3 technically perfect shots, but Jerome would answer with a body punch that made Cohen's movement hesitate. The Israeli fighter was winning the rounds on the judges' cards, but Jerome's punches were changing the fight's physics. Round 4 revealed the first cracks. Cohen was breathing slightly through his mouth, his movement less fluid than the opening bell. He had thrown over 200 punches with elite technique, landed dozens with full power, and his opponent was still advancing with the same maddening calm. It was deeply unsettling. Cohen is showing frustration, the commentator observed. He's landing at a high percentage, but Magbanua seems to be absorbing it, walking through it. This is not normal durability. What Ben David didn't know was that Boyd had trained Jerome using methods learned in the hardest gyms of Manila and Cebu, places where fighters survived by making punishment useful. It wasn't about avoiding damage. It was about choosing when to accept it and making sure the price was always higher for the other man. Jerome had spent years learning how to look vulnerable without being exposed, how to invite attacks that created openings. Boyd called it tahaya. Jerome just called it patience. He rolled with punches just enough to blunt their force and just late enough to stay in range. He let shots land on shoulders and arms that looked like damage but cost him little. More than anything, he understood energy. Every exchange left Cohen breathing harder. Every minute made Jerome stronger by comparison. Cohen thought he was winning arguments. Jerome was watching the clock. In round 5, Jerome started increasing his output subtly. He landed a beautiful counter-left uppercut that snapped Cohen's head back. The champion was still dangerous, but something had shifted. The commentators noted it. The crowd sensed it. In round 6, the shift became visible. Cohen's punches, while still technically sound, had lost their explosive snap. His footwork became deliberate rather than instinctive. His breathing was audible between combinations. Meanwhile, Jerome looked exactly as he had in round 1. Calm, measured, relentless, his chest rising and falling in controlled rhythm. Jerome began landing precise combinations that Cohen's defense couldn't process. A feinted jab to draw the parry, a slipping right hand to the solar plexus, a rising left hook that Cohen's guard was too slow to catch. The Tel Aviv fighter was elite and perfectly trained, but he was fading under pressure that didn't register on the scorecards but accumulated in his muscles and lungs. Ben David was urgent in the corner, his voice still controlled but edged with something new. Doubt. Box him. Use your feet. Create distance. You are winning the rounds. But Cohen couldn't create distance anymore. His legs were heavy with lactic acid. His arms felt weighted. The body shots from rounds 1 through 4 had stolen his mobility, without announcing themselves dramatically. By round 7, Cohen was fighting in bursts, trying to preserve energy. Jerome landed a crushing right hook to the floating ribs that made Cohen's face gray with pain. The sound was muffled but sickening. Round 8 was a revelation. Jerome was now the predator, cutting off the ring with angles that seemed impossible, landing combinations at will. The Israeli corner was in controlled panic, Ben David's instructions becoming more frequent, more desperate. By round 9, Cohen was fighting to survive, trying to reach a place he had always ruled. His corner begged him to trust his training, to remember his discipline. Jerome watched him closely, almost gently. His punches now came in sequences that flowed without thought, each one setting up the next. A jab that measured, a right hand that displaced, a left hook that arrived with the weight of every round that came before it. A devastating right uppercut dropped Cohen to his knees in round 10. He beat the count with the desperate discipline of an undefeated champion, but his legs were unreliable now, betraying him at crucial moments. Rice watched carefully, his hand ready to intervene. Cohen survived round 10 through sheer will, but his face was swollen, and his movement was survival, not competition. His corner considered stopping it, but Cohen refused with a look that broke their hearts. In round 11, Jerome fought with the clarity of a man who had waited his entire life for this moment. He landed a perfect 4-punch sequence, double jab to establish the rhythm, right cross that turned Cohen's head, left hook to body that made the champion's hands drop instinctively, and the final right uppercut that lifted Cohen onto his toes before he collapsed against the ropes. Cohen tried to cover, but another combination, hook, uppercut, straight right, forced Rice to step between them, his arms spreading to end the contest. The fight was over. The arena exploded. Filipino flags waved in violent celebration. Jerome dropped to his knees in his corner, not in exhaustion but in gratitude, his team rushing to surround him. Boyett knelt beside him, tears streaming down his weathered face as he embraced his fighter, whispering, "Salamat, Anik. Salamat." Nando and Dodong joined them, for men holding each other in the center of the ring, while the world cheered around them. In the opposite corner, Ben David sat frozen on the ring apron, his hands gripping the edge until his knuckles were white. Cohen sat on his stool, his head bowed, his perfect record shattered. Ben David finally moved, walking slowly to his fighter, kneeling to remove his gloves with the same care he had shown in victory, but now his hands were shaking. The crowd's noise seemed distant, unreal. The commentators were shouting about one of the great upsets in recent memory, about the mystery of Filipino durability, about the ghost who had walked through fire to take the throne. But in the ring, there was only silence between the two corners, one celebrating a lifetime of sacrifice, one mourning the limits of perfection. At the post-fight press conference, Ben David sat alone. Cohen had been taken to the hospital for observation, a precaution for the brutal body punishment he had absorbed. Ben David's eyes were red, his voice hoarse when he spoke. "I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. I thought I understood boxing. I thought technique and science and preparation were enough. I didn't understand that there are places in this world where boxing is not a sport. It is survival, and survival teaches lessons that science cannot measure." He looked up at the cameras, his arrogance replaced by something like awe. Jerome Agbanua did not beat Eliav Cohen with inferior technique. He beat him with a deeper understanding of what the sport truly is. He let us believe we were teaching him. He let us spend our energy proving our superiority. And when we had nothing left, he showed us what he had been saving. That is not simplicity. That is, I don't have a word for it in English or Hebrew. In Filipino, they call it discarte, the art of making do, the wisdom of the survivor. When Jerome arrived, the room stood. He wore a simple white shirt, his face unmarked except for slight swelling around his eyes. He sat beside Boyett, who spoke for him initially, explaining the strategy, the patience, the faith in their preparation. Then Jerome leaned to the microphone, his voice soft but clear. "I did not prove that Filipinos are better than Israelis. I proved that every fighter has a story written before they enter the ring. My story was written in places where there was no choice but to continue. Mr. Ben David is a great teacher, but some lessons can only be learned in the places where I come from. I am happy he understands now." He stood, and the room stood with him. Ben David approached, extending his hand. Jerome took it, and the Israeli legend pulled him into an embrace that the cameras captured. The moment when arrogance met humility, when certainty met mystery, when the ghost from Cebu became champion of the world. Outside in the New York night, Filipino fans sang and danced in the streets. In Tel Aviv, Cohen watched from his hospital bed, beginning already to understand what his trainer had understood. And in a small gym in Cebu, children who had never left their neighborhood watched the replay, seeing for the first time that their stories, their struggles, their silent violence could reach the highest places in the world.